Hi guys, in this video we will be learning a case study for an urban environment which will be London.
To begin this case study, I'm going to go through some background about London. So London is the capital city of the United Kingdom and it had a population in 2015 of 8.6 million people. So it is a very large city, but it's not as big as some of the mega cities in the world such as Mumbai and Tokyo, but it's still a fairly big city. And by 2050, it's predicted that it will have a population of 11 million. So, some history to London. London developed as a port city along the River Thames, and it eventually became the seat of political power and government for the country. And some people think of London as the world's most important city, and we're going to look at some of the factors as to why people think that now. So, why is London so important? Well, London is firstly very important because it is a global financial centre. So here we have a lot of business that has its headquarters located in London, which makes it a financial centre. Lots of the biggest businesses in the world have their headquarters here. Also, it has a growing reputation as a technological hub, and it also has at the same time top rankings for software and multimedia development as well. London is also an economic powerhouse, and this links to it being a global financial centre, and this attracts a lot of foreign direct investment from businesses and corporations from abroad. And also, London is also a centre for higher education. London is home to some of the world's best universities, and these universities are also doing some of the most world and groundbreaking research as well. So this makes them very important. So there's overall a very high academic standard in London. London also has more than 300 languages spoken within the city, and there are more than 50 non-Indigenous communities with populations over 10,000 individuals. So this makes London one of the most cosmopolitan and tolerant cities in the world. So here we find there's a mixture of all sorts of different cultures living together within one city, and people tend to get on with each other very well. There's no form of hatred towards one another. We're very much a united city. So alongside this, London is also very much a hub for art, culture, music and dance, with lots of museums, galleries, theatres and so on. So there's lots of things cultural-wise to do and visit in London. And also London is one of the most visited cities in the entire world due to its history, its heritage, art and culture. And recently London hosted the Olympic Games in 2012. So hosting the Olympics attracted a lot of tourism and visitors into the UK, and also led to a lot of redevelopment of many areas of London to improve it before the Games started. So now looking at some of the cultural aspects of London, in particular its cultural diversity. As I mentioned earlier, London has a very much multicultural population, and it's said to have the world under one roof. So pretty much every single country on earth, there is bound to be someone or a group of people from that country living in London. And this here in this photograph was a display outside Westminster, which was to represent the multicultural society that we have in London. So London has a port history, and this is very much influential in its cultural diversity at the moment. So because it has a main port, London is on the River Thames, as we can see in these photographs above here. Much of the city is located very close to the river. So this is why London initially was a port city. And this led to a long history of immigration, which has led to a rich ethnic and cultural diversity even in the city now. So the Empire Windrush was a ship that arrived in London in 1948, carrying with it a lot of West Indian men who were seeking employment in the United Kingdom, and this is thought to be the beginning of mass immigration into the UK. This is a photograph of Empire Windrush here, docking in London, and you can see all the West Indian immigrants arriving into London. So immigrants have played a vital role in creating new concepts of what it means to be a Londoner. So Londoner doesn't mean someone that has to necessarily be white and British, but a Londoner can be someone from any country in the world who shares a sense of belonging to the space of London. So in 2015, 3.8 8 million Londoners, and which accounts for 44% of the population of London, were of black or minority origin, and it's thought that this is going to continue to increase, and by 2038 this will have reached 50%. London is also regarded as a welcoming city, and residents recognise the positive social and economic contributions that immigrants make within the city. So this just shows as a whole that London is very appreciative of its cultural diversity and recognises the positives that have come along with such diversification. So now looking at economic and social well-being in London. Despite London being a huge global financial centre, London also has huge areas of poverty. And this is because there is a significant wealth gap between the rich people and the poor people living in London. And this wealth gap is continuing to widen. So in 2015, statistics were released that showed that for every pound that was earned by the bottom 10% of people living in London financially, £172 was earned by the top 10%. So the top 10% essentially were earning 172 times more than the bottom 10%. So income inequality is much greater in London than in any other region in the UK. And this does have links to the immigration that is very much present in London, with much poorer immigrants coming into the city as a point of entry into the country. So 16% of the population in the poorest 10% nationally are in London, and also 17% of the richest percentage of the country are within 10% richest nationally. So these statistics just show you that London has some of the richest people in the country, but also some of the poorest people in the country as well. And this is also exemplified by this statistic here, whereby the richest 10% of people by financial assets, so that means how much money they have in London, accounts for 60% of all assets in London. So of all the assets in London, 60% of this is owned by the richest 10% of people. So the rest of 90% holds the remaining 40% essentially. So also the top 10% of employees in London earn 4.5 times as much as the bottom 10%, and also the borough of Kensington and Chelsea has the greatest amount of income inequality, being the home of many of the richest people living in London, but also many of the poorest people in London. Now looking at some of the physical environmental conditions in London. London was very much famous for its smog. So this is a mixture of smoke and fog, which creates these sort of conditions, and they're very bad for your health. So London is often renowned to be called the Big Smoke because of this. And following this, this very much came after the Industrial Revolution, when there was a lot of industry in the area. A Clean Air Act was established in 1956 to try and improve the air quality in London, and since then other legislation has come into place in order to try and reduce CO2 emissions. So efforts to reduce CO2 emissions have been very successful, such as low emission zones and the congestion charge as well in central London. However, the nitrogen dioxide levels in London still breach EU legal limits, so this is something that needs to be tackled as well. Also in London, London has higher levels of air pollution than surrounding rural areas, just showing how the industry and the amount of congestion and traffic in cities is very much a negative impact on air quality. And in 2014, Public Health England announced statistics that 5.3% of deaths in people over the age of 25 are now linked to air pollution. So these will be things like respiratory diseases and heart disease as well. Also, in terms of London's urban heat island, while the centre of London in particular is often 10 degrees warmer than surrounding rural areas, and this just shows how much heat is retained within the city. And this can lead to summer heat waves occurring during the summer, and this poses threat to homes, workplaces and public transport as well. And it also has negative impacts on the environment as well, because this will have effects not only on health but also leads to greater water and energy consumption as well, to try and cool down during these heat wave periods. And another environmental threat to London is the threat of flooding. And as we saw, London is based around the River Thames, and a lot of the city is built on the floodplain. So London's at risk of many different types of flooding, including tidal, fluvial, surface, sewer and groundwater flooding. So this is an extremely significant risk to London, and it's thought that with climate change this will bring wetter winters to the UK, also rising sea levels as well, and higher tidal surges, which will serve to increase the risk of flooding even more. So currently 15% of London is built on the floodplain, and it's protected by flood defences such as the Thames Barrage, as shown in this picture here. And this 15% of the land of London, which is on the floodplain, is, really of significant value because it not only includes residential property, but also 75 underground stations, 10 hospitals and 49 rail stations as well. So it's very much importance that this land needs to be protected from flooding. And finally, we're going to learn a bit about urban sustainability in London. So London Sustainable Development Commission was established in 2002, and the aim of establishing this commission was that they were going to be able to advise the Mayor of London on making London a sustainable world city. So we know that sustainability is all about using resources in a sustainable fashion so that we don't damage resources for future generations, including protecting the environment as well. So many strategies have been implemented in London to tackle key issues such as inequality, air pollution and urban deprivation as well. And also, it's important to note that London is still growing as a city, so there's going to be much greater pressure on services and infrastructure, and we need to manage the pressure on these surfaces in a sustainable manner as well. So strategies are being encouraged to encourage greater urban sustainability, and these will be key to London's future viability as a city as well. So some of the social developments taking place are things like urban renewal, which occurred before the 2012 Olympic Games, especially in the Olympic Park, which was completely renewed and redeveloped. There's an Every Child programme which helps children and funds them to do things like music and other activities. And there was also the London Challenge initiative to improve education in the city, and now London educational standards are higher than anywhere else in the country. So this can be seen as a really good example of how to improve educational levels. Also, environmentally, there's been the introduction of the congestion charge to reduce the number of vehicles in central London, which will also reduce emissions. Lots more green transport, so there's the introduction of hybrid buses that we can see here, and also the introduction of Boris bikes after the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, who introduced a bike scheme where people can rent bikes in the City of London and simply pick them up and deposit them at docking stations. Economically, there was the creation of the London living wage, so employers have to pay a certain minimum amount to their employees, and also the development of Crossrail as well, which is a new rail development which is going to link up Heathrow with central London, Heathrow being the London's main airport, and this is going to improve economically the economic development in London as well, encouraging more tourism and so on, and also financial direct investment. And also urban governance as well. The role of the Mayor of London is not a role that's been there forever. This was a role that was created in order to create a commitment to restore a citywide government for London.
Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're looking for an amazing A-level geography resource, join me today in my series of engaging bite-sized video tutorials. See you soon, and together let's make A-level geography a walk in the park.